The tensions over the U.S. push to claim Greenland have eased after President Donald Trump called off planned tariffs on European allies and unveiled what he called a framework of a future deal over the territory.
Mr. Trump says that the deal will be ultimate, long-term and infinite, that covers security and minerals. The American president had earlier ruled out the use of force over Greenland, and the move comes ahead of an emergency EU meeting today.
Really fantastic for the USA, gets everything we wanted, including especially real national security and international security.
How so? Can you give us some details, please?
Well, the deal is going to be put out pretty soon. I mean, we'll see. It's right now a little bit in progress, but pretty far along. It gets us everything we needed to get.
Mr. Trump first announced the deal on Truth Social following talks with NATO chief Mark Rutte. He said additional discussions are being held on the Golden Dome missile defense shield in relation to Greenland. And Mr. Trump and NATO chief met on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, and no details of the deal were revealed.
The New York Times reports it is a compromise deal following a NATO meeting. Denmark would give the U.S. sovereignty over small pockets of Greenland where the U.S. could build military bases. Apparently, it was the NATO chief's idea. And the report cited officials comparing the arrangement to the UK bases in Cyprus, which are regarded as British territory. Well, NATO says the US will hold talks with Denmark and Greenland to ensure Russia and China never gain a foothold. President Trump continues to press for the US to own Greenland.
I'm seeking immediate negotiations to once again discuss the acquisition of Greenland by the United States, just as we have acquired many other territories throughout our history, as many of the European nations have. They've acquired. There's nothing wrong with it.
But Denmark's foreign minister warned that his country will not change its red lines on the matter, recognizing that Mr. Trump not using military force is a good signal, but cautioning his ambition cannot be accommodated. And the Swedish top diplomat says it was good that President Trump backed off on his tariff threats, saying the work among allies has had an impact. For more, let's speak now with Bradford, the Henry L. Moses Professor of Law and International Organization at Columbia Law School. Professor Bradford, thank you so much for joining us. I'm wondering, were you surprised by how quickly Mr. Trump dropped the EU tariff threats? And do you think he blinked first?
So first of all, thank you for having me. And it has been an extraordinary week, and the stakes were very high, as were the tensions. So maybe there is now a realization that this really was too big of a gamble that he was playing. But we also have now gotten used to this idea. There's even a term for this tug of trade. Trump always chickens out. He threatens with tariffs, and then we've seen him back off before. So it may not be a complete surprise. It certainly is a great relief that we see a movement towards de-escalation as opposed to escalation. But there's much that we still don't know about the deal and how stable any such deal is at that point.
I'm sure the European leaders are leaving with a bit of a relief, but I wonder, do they come out of this stronger? And what sort of lessons might they take forward?
So this has been as clear of a clarion call as one might imagine for the Europeans. This is certainly now the end of this very long period of denial, or this kind of false hope that the transatlantic alliance is something that the Europeans can still count on. I think the Europeans now know that if anything, Americans are predictably unpredictable and reliably unreliable, and they need to make policies based on that. And this idea that the Europeans need to build their own military capabilities, they need to de-risk away from the US, they cannot be as dependent because those dependencies are now frequently being weaponized against Europeans. So I think what needs to be done is clear. The question is how feasible it is and how long will it take?
Professor Bradford, President Trump in his speech wasted no time in tearing into Europe's development. I wonder if you think I'm right in seeing a parallel to when the Europeans moved to up their defense spending after similar prodding by the U.S. president mid last year. Did they succumb to the same pressure from the U.S. president here?
So there's been now consistent pressure, and this also predates President Trump, that the Europeans have been overly reliant on American security. They haven't invested enough, and they haven't basically done their own fair share in contributing to the defense of NATO. And I think that is where the Europeans are actually accepting that more needs to be done. You see a massive effort to rearm Europe. We see increase in military budgets. We see Germany among the countries that are taking a lead in this. And there's also a shared interest in the security of the Arctic. The Europeans have made it clear all along that we actually want the same thing. We want to make sure that Greenland is safe. We want to make sure that the security of Arctic is a priority. But then the question is, how do we get there? And there's been proposals that we do this jointly with NATO. That includes greater European investment in their defense, and hence a greater contribution to NATO and NATO's ability to take care of Arctic security.
And Professor, Trump touted a Greenland deal framework with NATO. Not much information is out yet, but how or what might that look like? And has the question of Greenland's sovereignty really been settled, or could it come back up again?
So I am afraid that Greenlanders certainly, nor does Denmark, feel that this is now settled, that these threats, provocations would not be resurfacing later down the road. Certainly the uncertainty, I think, remains and is very, very high. But there is a sense that at least even President Trump is facing the pressures, whether it's from the markets, whether from the business interests, some people in his own party, which suggests that he's able to now think more clearly on how much is at risk if we were to move ahead with the kinds of military threats, with a full-blown trade war, and how costly that would be ultimately also for the United States. So I don't think the Danes, the Greenlanders, are breathing very calmly at this point. And I think the problem is that we just don't know the details of that deal. So it most likely includes measures around missile defense, greater security. We don't know if it has an economic aspect, including then some access to the minerals, something that President Trump has been coveting and was also coveting in Ukraine. He has very deep economic interest driving his deal making. Again, those details are not something that we know, and we don't know whether they are acceptable for Greenland, for Denmark, and for Europe.
Yeah, but so far, we are led to believe that Mark Rutte hit all the right spots. Well, Professor, tapping on your expertise, what message is President Trump now sending to the global business leaders, the big guys over in Davos and beyond, by making and then reversing these tariff threats? How are multinationals likely to interpret this rapid shift?
So I have always said that the uncertainty itself is the greatest tariffs. It is an impediment for business. It does hinder investments. Business doesn't like the uncertainty. And we have seen now a pattern of constant uncertainty, reversal of decisions, and especially long-term investments. You just cannot base it when you don't know what the US policy is next week, not to mention a month from now or next year. So I think the business community remains very alert that the policy volatility has grown, but I think they are updating their priors, that we've seen that President Trump is willing to even threaten its own close allies and put into question the future of the transatlantic relationship. And it is something that now is factored into the calculation of the business leaders in Davos.
We've been hearing a lot about the word trust. Can transatlantic trust be rebuilt, or is it gone for good?
So I think this is the end of the illusion that the US and EU share certain values, and there is a foundation for the transatlantic partnership that has been very important for the economic relations, for political relations, for geopolitical interests. I think when the closest ally, or what you thought were your closest allies, is starting a trade war against you, is threatening to withdraw the security guarantees from the continent is turning its back on Ukraine. And it's also, if we recall the national security strategy that was released very recently, that is also looking a civilizational regime change, if you like, attacking European democracies, supporting populist anti-EU parties. It is a very new reality. And it is difficult to imagine that the trust that has been lost, given everything that has been going on, that trust could be easily built. And I think Europeans know that they cannot be at the mercy of US elections every 4 years. You have voters in Wisconsin deciding if America is going to help protect Europe, if America is going to be a proponent of open markets and free trade, and what is the basis of that relationship. So I am really afraid that trust, it may not be permanently lost, but it will take a long time to rebuild.
Okay, Professor Bradford, thank you so much for your time and your insight this morning. Anna Bradford, Professor of Law and International Organization at Columbia Law School.